The Pat Kenny Show.
With the Jaguar E-Pace. Beautiful by design and dynamic to drive. Delivering performance that is unmistakably Jaguar.
This is News Talk.
Dublin ambulance services are at breaking point after a surge in emergency calls in the past week, with unions calling for changes to be urgently made to ensure the safety of people who are calling for life-saving care. Our reporter Barry White joins us. Barry, how bad is the current situation?
Hi Pat, good morning. Well, firstly, how the current system works: when someone calls 999 for an ambulance, their call is directed to one of two call centres, one based in Tallaght here in Dublin and the other in Ballyshannon in County Donegal. And if all the resources are already responding to calls, well, the job is then given to the next available ambulance, which could be hours away from where the caller is. And I've been told of many examples of this happening. And Dublin paramedics and the union SIPTU are calling for changes to this current system over fears that ambulances are not reaching those who desperately need them quickly enough. So firstly, I've been speaking to Dublin paramedic Peter Ray. He's the chairperson of the Irish Representative Council for Paramedics. And he's been telling me just how bad the current situation is.
The ambulance service in this country is very, very busy. To put it practically, there's more miles being done. There's more people being seen. There is long distances being travelled to patients, which is unacceptable at the moment. That's on the service delivery side. On the patient or the staff impact side, we have whereby crews are going for long periods of time on duty without any break whatsoever. We have shift overruns where sometimes people are working considerably beyond the normal working time. And then we have how calls and the type of calls that we're doing.
So the ambulance service is stretched, to say the least. What impact is it having on staff?
The impact on staff, both on a number of fronts. Shift overruns are a particular problem because when people go to work, they expect reasonably to be finished within a reasonable amount of time. Emergency services don't finish on the dot. We don't. It's not like an industrial environment. If you're due to finish at 7, it's fortunate if you do finish at 7. But sometimes people at the moment are running into 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. That's on a day shift. So the consequence on that, on the individuals, are to become strained, and consequently that leads to a decrease in morale.
So it seems the resources are simply not there to deal with the amount of calls that are coming in. How often would there be calls coming in to the ambulance service that look, to put it frankly, are a waste of time?
Yes, I wouldn't put it as broadly a waste of time. Everybody, I would hope, would to take into consideration as being a significant thing to call an ambulance to their door. All I would say is please be considerate in relation to when you call us.
And that's Dublin paramedic Peter Ray. You've been speaking, Barry, to people in Dublin who actually had to wait hours for an ambulance.
Yeah, I have. I actually put out a tweet yesterday, Pat, asking people in the Dublin area that they know anyone who has had to wait for a prolonged period for an ambulance recently. And yet lots of people got back to me. One man from the Crumlin area told me that his 89-year-old father recently fell and broke his hip. The ambulance took well over an hour. While another man told me that his mother became very ill a few weeks back. They rang an ambulance at 9:30 on a Sunday night, and the ambulance did not arrive until almost 1 a.m, so 3.5 hours later. And I'm sure some of our listeners may have experienced similar situations, and if they have, they can text us on 53106. But the longest wait for an ambulance in Dublin I came across was Ken Dunn from Tallaght. His wife recently took ill, and it took 4 hours for an ambulance to arrive. And this is despite the fact that they live fairly close to Tallaght Hospital.
My wife had COVID and she was struggling to breathe, so I decided to ring, and we've had it for a couple of days, the COVID, but her COVID was just getting gradually worse. She was struggling to breathe, so we decided to ring an ambulance for her, and we rang at 7 o'clock, and we were waiting on the ambulance to arrive. And by 10:30, there was still no sign of the ambulance. So I rang up again. The ambulance service said they were very busy. There was 40 calls in front of us. But within the next 20 to 25 minutes, the ambulance arrived.
And you're only, just over 5 minutes drive from Tala Hospital, yet it took almost 4 hours for an ambulance to come to your house?
Yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. You could actually walk up to it. It's that close. It's about a 10-minute walk from here, yeah.
Now, luckily, your wife is okay now, but it could have been a different situation.
Oh, easily, yeah. I mean, she was struggling to breathe, and we were he came out, and I have to say, the paramedic was very good. That came out, and he explained everything, and it was just like COVID is a very it affects you more than your breathing. Like, it affects the way you think as well. So, he came out and reassured her, and he was very good now, I have to say. But luckily, she was okay.
And this is not the only experience you've had of an ambulance taking hours to come to a call out. You've actually witnessed this happen elsewhere as well.
Yeah, in work, a chap collapsed in a car park in work, and luckily enough we had first aiders there, and they came out, but they didn't move him. They just put a coat under his head and stuff, and just wait for the ambulance to arrive. And the company rang his wife, and she came out, and within an hour and a half there was still no sign of the ambulance. So he was sitting up at this stage, and he got into the car, and she drove him to Tala Hospital. So we rang after an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes to cancel the ambulance, but there was no sign of him arriving. A
man collapsed, ambulance doesn't arrive, and his wife actually had to take him to hospital.
Yeah, it was quicker. It was quicker to get someone to drive to the hospital.
And that's Ken Dunn from Tala speaking. He says he feels lucky there were no fatal consequences in his situation, but there have been fatalities because of delays in ambulance call-outs in the past, haven't there, Barry?
Yeah, unfortunately there has been, Pat. And I can recall actually reporting on a couple of cases in the northwest in recent years. In January 2018, 71-year-old Margaret Callahan from Letterkenny waited 70 minutes for an ambulance despite living less than 6 minutes from Letterkenny University Hospital. The inquest into her death was told the ambulance that transferred her to hospital had to come from Dunloe, while 2 ambulances were parked at Letterkenny University Hospital near her home. Well, in 2013, 70-year-old Maura Porter died after being knocked down by a car in Carndonagh in County Donegal. Her family had to wait almost an hour for an ambulance to come from Letterkenny, and this was despite there being an ambulance based in their hometown at an ambulance depot in Carndonagh. So when there are delays to an ambulance call-out, there can be fatal consequences. And I've been speaking to Maura Porter's daughter, Davina, and she says 8 years on after her mother's death, it seems no lessons have been learnt.
I'm very disappointed. Obviously COVID has made it a lot worse now and has put extra pressure on the ambulance service. But the HSE and the ambulance service, they are aware that this problem has existed, but it's obviously now a lot more serious with COVID.
Would you be concerned that another family could end up in the situation that your family ended up in, with, I suppose, fatal consequences? We've
been down that road, and I would hate that anybody would have to go through what we went through, waiting on along the road with somebody with serious injuries, dying and not getting help. But the problem is now, I think that the people in Ireland still don't realise that they don't have an adequate ambulance service, despite numerous cases and the media highlighting it. It still hasn't sunk in with people. And unless people realise that when they need it, it may not be there. And they need to put pressure on their local representatives and try and get this changed.
8 years on after your mother's tragic death, did you think there would have been changes by now?
Well, we had hoped that something would come out of her death. There was a review done by the National Ambulance Service, and they made a number of recommendations. And they said that if these recommendations were carried out, the chances of that long wait that we went through, the probability of reoccurring was very slim. But that's not the case. I've been listening, and people are waiting for ambulance. And unfortunately, if it's serious enough, people may die.
Well, that was Davina Porter there. Some of the texts coming in. My wife's aunt took a stroke and it took 3.5 hours to get her to a hospital. A Galway-based ambulance came to her to bring her to Limerick. My wife had COVID, rang an ambulance at 6 p.m. Ambulance never came. It was 9:30, so I live in Greenhills. Decided to get her into the car myself and drive her down to James Hospital. So I rang back the ambulance service to cancel it, and he said, thank you very much, because you're still number 20 on the list. People need to realise that if you can drive or be driven to the hospital, that is better. Don't wait for an ambulance for hours. Just get in the car if you can. Well, finally, Barry, there are calls for changes to be made in how ambulance call-outs are dealt with here, but what changes need to be made?
Well, basically in Dublin, Pat, at the minute, the level of cases coming into call centres has increased tenfold in recent weeks, and the resources are simply not there to deal with the amount of calls. So there needs to be more paramedics on the ground. And I was having a look at how paramedics qualify in Ireland. Here it takes 3 years to qualify as a paramedic, while in the UK it takes 2 years. So maybe that's something that could be looked at. Although SIP2 have said they are hopeful that more paramedics will be available to the National Ambulance Service in the coming weeks, with an estimated 115 paramedics expected to graduate for Christmas. Also, €200 million is pumped into the National Ambulance Service here every year, so surely that money could be better spent. And the CEO of the Lifeline Ambulance Service, David Hall, says it's time for a complete overhaul of the National Ambulance Service here.
No, I'm not surprised. Like, if you have the same problem and don't make any changes, you're going to continually have a repetitive problem. The difficulty in this instance is these problems and challenges and operational issues cost lives. They impact on people's lives and their recovery, their illnesses, their injuries.
How can this problem be solved?
Well, I think an overall review of the entire ambulance service is needed, rather than one of these reports. I think the ambulance service probably in the Department of Health has the highest number of reports ever conducted in any area of health in the country, and nothing's ever changed, nothing ever happens, because everyone thinks a report needs to happen. But they need to make proper changes, take some of those reports and the recommendations that aren't new and actually make changes. So look at training. Do we need the length of time for paramedic courses? Why is it that when we have two paramedics on an ambulance, when our own regulator says you can do that with an EMT, a junior paramedic and a paramedic, why has that not been changed? Why don't we segregate the ambulance service like is done in the UK, where we have routine transfers and we have frontline work, and never the two shall meet, where you cannot impact on the operation of the routine work during the day by taking those ambulances out of circulation to compensate for vehicles you're missing for the frontline work. So there's some basic components of this that we can look at that will help improve the service and, more importantly, save and improve outcomes for patients.
This is a problem that's going on for years. How bad is it now? Is it getting worse year on year?
Well, it's very bad when you don't have the trolley crisis yet. So you think of it, the standard excuse has been the emergency departments, and the handover of the emergency departments has been an issue. But we're now in one of the quietest times of the year. And for months and during the entire summer, we've had various media outlets reporting extensive delays for ambulance services and for ambulances getting to patients. We don't have the trolley watch chaos that we were going to have during the winter currently. So that'll just tell you how serious this is now, that outside the normal chaotic trolley issues that arise at winter, we have delays in the ambulances, because normally the excuse that's traditionally given is the ambulances are delayed at the emergency departments, and they are delayed at the emergency departments. But there's more than just delays at the emergency departments are causing these delays.
So a bad situation at the minute, which is going to get worse, which ultimately could see people dying?
100%. There's no doubt in the wider world in my mind that on a daily or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, patients in Ireland are dying as a direct result of an inadequate ambulance service.
And that's the CEO of the Lifeline Ambulance Service, David Hall. Some more of your texts. I had an out-of-hospital, out-of-home heart attack in Cork City on the August Bank holiday. Thanks to the amazing work of those who came upon me, the ambulance service and the cardiac team at CUH, I wouldn't have the pleasure of texting you right now. So thank you to one and all. Brian in Wexford says, you should be able to ask on the phone how long the ambulance will be and where it's coming from, and then you could make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to wait or go to hospital yourself with all the risks that might entail. Anyway, that report from Barry White. Barry, thank you very much for joining us.